Before we get deep into today's subject, I want to say this directly to you as a fellow history obsessive. If you value serious, source-driven military history that goes beyond surface-level storytelling, make sure you subscribe to After the Sirens right now and leave a comment sharing which period of warfare you want us to break down next. This channel exists for people who don't just watch history, but study it. Now, let's get into it. World War II is often remembered through tanks, aircraft, and industrial-scale weaponry, but the reality on the ground was far messier, more improvised, and far more personal. Soldiers on every front faced shortages, unpredictable combat conditions, and constant pressure to adapt. What emerged from that environment was a brutal form of battlefield ingenuity, where everyday objects were repurposed into deadly tools. These were not gimmicks. These hacks saved lives, bought seconds in close combat, and sometimes turned ordinary items into weapons of last resort. The battlefield necessity that drove weapon improvisation. Improvised weapons weren't born from creativity alone, they were born from desperation. Supply lines collapsed, specialized gear failed, and soldiers found themselves in situations their training never fully anticipated. Infantry units clearing buildings, prisoners attempting escape, resistance fighters lacking standardized arms, and soldiers behind enemy lines all had to rely on what was around them. Understanding these hacks gives us insight into how real combat functions when doctrine breaks down. For modern survivalists, the lesson is simple. Tools matter less than adaptability. Soap bars turned into grenade killers. One of the most practical improvisations involved something as mundane as soap. Soldiers discovered that stuffing a bar of soap or tightly packed cloth into the vent holes of enemy grenades could prevent proper detonation. German stick grenades were especially vulnerable to this. In close-quarters combat or during grenade exchanges, soldiers who had the presence of mind to disable a grenade instead of throwing it back could neutralize a lethal threat instantly. The practical takeaway here is recognizing mechanical weak points in weapons. Even today, understanding how a device functions can reveal unexpected methods of disabling it under pressure. Bed springs were, actually reshaped into brutal trench clubs. Trench warfare remnants lingered well into the Second World War, especially in static defensive lines. Soldiers scavenged bed springs from abandoned homes and hospitals, bending and sharpening the metal into jagged clubs. Wrapped with cloth or leather for grip, these makeshift weapons were honestly devastating in night raids and silent attacks. The lesson here is structural repurposing. Spring steel is resilient, flexible and, capable of holding an edge. Knowing how to identify materials with these properties can be absolutely invaluable when conventional weapons are unavailable. Helmets were sometimes converted into rather crude fragmentation weapons. Damaged helmets weren't always just discarded. Instead, some soldiers packed them with explosives, scrap metal, or even broken glass, turning them into improvised fragmentation devices. These devices were used primarily by resistance fighters and troops who were short on manufactured grenades. The helmet's curved shape helped direct the blast outward, increasing lethality. From a technical perspective, this demonstrates early understanding of blast containment and fragmentation patterns. In survival terms, it reinforces how containment shapes explosive force, something modern engineers still account for in ordnance design. Socks filled with sand for silent close combat. When silence mattered more than firepower, soldiers resorted to weighted socks. Filled with sand, dirt or stones, these flexible weapons delivered concussive force without noise. They were particularly favoured during night patrols and prisoner handling. Unlike rigid weapons, they reduced the risk of lethal fractures while still incapacitating a target. The modern application here lies in understanding non-lethal force options and how weight distribution affects impact energy, a principle still relevant in self-defense tools today. Razor blades hidden inside uniforms. Some soldiers, especially those at risk of capture, sewed razor blades into their uniforms or boots. These weren't meant for combat, but for escape. Blades could cut bindings, canvas, or even thin metal wire. This wasn't improvisation in the moment. It was anticipatory survival thinking. The lesson is preparation. Concealed tools, even primitive ones, can change the outcome of captivity. Modern survival kits still reflect this philosophy with hidden cutting tools and redundant systems. Bottles transformed into effective incendiary weapons. Glass bottles filled with fuel and fitted with cloth wicks became crude but effective incendiaries. While the Molotov cocktail is well known, what's often overlooked is how soldiers adapted fuel types based on availability, including alcohol, cooking oil, and even animal fat. Soldiers learned quickly how viscosity affected ignition and spread. This level of experimentation under fire reveals how deeply practical knowledge mattered. For modern readers, it emphasizes testing materials and understanding chemical behavior rather than relying on theory alone. Entrenching tools, were often sharpened into lethal melee weapons. The standard-issue shovel, believe it or not, became one of the deadliest improvised weapons of the war. Soldiers would sharpen the edges to a near razor finish, turning it into a rather effective axe-like weapon. Lightweight, durable, and already carried, it was honestly devastating in trenches and forests. This really highlights the importance of dual-use tools. A modern survivalist, I dare say, should always evaluate how everyday gear can serve both defensive and offensive roles, if circumstances demand it. Wire and piano strings were, often used as silent garrots. In occupied territories, resistance fighters frequently lacked firearms, so piano wire, electrical cable, or even just strong cordage would be fashioned into silent strangulation tools. These methods required strength, technique, and close proximity, which made them risky but, quite effective. From a historical standpoint, this really underscores how asymmetric warfare relies on stealth and precision. The broader lesson here is, well, understanding human anatomy and leverage, not for glorification, but for recognizing how, with minimal tools, one can act decisively. It's all about seeing the fundamentals at play. So, why do these weapon hacks still matter today? Well, these aren't just curiosities. They really represent a mindset, a way of thinking where survival depended on understanding materials, mechanics, and of course human behavior. For historians, these examples provide raw insight into how war actually unfolds at ground level. And for survivalists, they offer timeless lessons in adaptability, preparation, and the intelligent use of whatever resources are available. If this kind of deep, uncompromising military history is what you came for, make sure you're subscribed to After the Sirens. Go ahead and share this video with someone who studies war beyond the textbook level, and, drop a comment telling us which conflict or survival topic you want dissected next. This channel is built for those who refuse to stop learning.